there, and thanks once again for tuning into the Explaining History YouTube channel. If you are watching this, it's probably because you're writing or studying something about Britain in the 1970s, and there is a wide consensus that there was an overall time of economic and political crisis throughout the 1970s. And I just want to explore a couple of reasons why that is. The first major reason is the decade experienced abnormally high levels of inflation. From 1973 onwards, particularly, Britain is hit with inflation due to the dramatic rise in oil prices caused by the Arab-Israeli War, or the War of Yom Kippur, as it is also known. The punishment for Britain, for Europe, and for America for backing Israel against Egypt and Syria was the OPEC countries dramatically raising oil prices and plunging the Western world into recession and inflation. But that's not the only reason for inflation. Inflation had been on the march since the late 1960s. The worldwide economic boom that had happened probably from the 1940s through to the 60s, following the end of the Second World War, had begun to go into decline. Unemployment had increased, and inflation was growing in Britain and in most other first world economies, partly due to the fact that these economies were overheating, and also due to the fact that comparatively low levels of investment in Britain, at least, had left British industries uncompetitive. When you have uncompetitive industries, by and large, they're inefficient, and they are kind of generators of inflationary pressures within economies. This is an economist podcast, so so you have long-term factors such as inefficiencies, and you also have pressures from the demands for higher wages, particularly from Britain's miners. There's a huge number of men in the mining industry in the late 60s, early 70s. And these were guys who had, they believed with some justification, that they had done a lot of the hard work to power the economy of the 1960s and benefited comparatively superficially from any of the gains of the 1960s: increased leisure time, increased wages, increased job opportunities. The miners had gained virtually none of this. They were employees of the National Coal Board, and the National Coal Board, as a nationalised industry, had been quite convenient not to reward the miners. So the miners and other sections of the population were in the 1970s demanding higher wage claims. And as inflation goes up, as higher wage claims push inflation up, and as the economy doesn't expand to accommodate higher wage claims, the increase in wages is eaten away at by inflation, and so you get into this inflationary spiral of increasing wage demands, which reaches its kind of critical moment in 1979 in the Winter of Discontent, which is perhaps I have to fit that into another video. By 1976, Britain has to face the prospect of another humiliating devaluation in the pound, and by 1976 also, Britain is facing an inability to pay its own way. The twin expenses of a large welfare state and a continued military presence overseas has always been a huge burden on the United Kingdom, and as Britain's industries became more sluggish, more eaten away at by inflation, the alternative is to borrow money. In 1976, Chancellor Denis Healey announces to the Labour Party that the country must go cap in hand to the International Monetary Fund. The IMF gives Britain a bailout loan. However, the conditions attached to that loan are that the economy must go through a series of monetarist, or essentially right-wing economic reforms, And this means that the state sector needs to be cut back, that the tax burden needs to be reduced, and these conditions are really so the IMF gets its money back. It's not throwing good money after bad in its view, but they are, interestingly, the economic conditions that resemble quite closely the policies of Margaret Thatcher, who, when she comes to power in 1979. So some of the kind of the precursors to Thatcherism were actually introduced by the Labour government from 1976 onwards. And I'm going to talk some more about this and more about the 70s in general in some subsequent videos. So remember to subscribe here and give us a like, give us a mention, send us to a friend, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, bye bye.